So we welcome in the former assistant general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, NHL executive with the Canucks, Leafs, Coyotes, Jets, our pal Laurence Gilman. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you guys doing? Slow news day.
Exhausted.
Oh, my goodness.
24
Don't
hours.
you miss this market? Don't you miss this market? Huh?
I do miss the market. I have to be honest with you.
Because, here's the thing. One of the ties that binds between you and I would argue Jim Rutherford is you knew how to communicate with this market. Jim got into the good graces of Canucks fans early by being the straight talk express. This week's straight talk was maybe a little further down the line. You've been in these rooms, Laurence. You've been in these meetings with managers where you're trying to stick handle difficult situations, including things that you typically want to keep in-house. What did you make of what Rutherford had to say to Gary Mason this week?
Well, let me begin by saying for the 20th time, I'm not in the room. I'm not in the organization. I don't know the exact relationships that exist between anybody there, particularly JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. When I read Gary Mason's piece and saw the aftermath of it, the first thing that struck me was Jim Rutherford turned perception into reality. And it made me think about a similar situation that we had in our regime in 2012-13, where there was this perception that Roberto Luongo and Corey Schneider couldn't stand each other and were both vying for the number one spot. It was creating friction with our team, and a lot of the same elements that are being put forth in the media and social media were out there. And our organization was proactive to dispel the perception and really hammer home the reality. And we did so by working with TSN and James Duthie to produce a piece called The Shocking Truth, which we had buy-in and sign off from our management, from our players, from our coaches. And it made light of the situation, and it highlighted that, in fact, Roberto Luongo and Corey Schneider were, in fact, close and supported each other. Now, I don't believe this is the same situation at this point.
No,
I think
wouldn't appear so.
I think that Jim Rutherford, as I've said many times, is he's in the Hall of Fame for a reason. I mean, he's in the Hall of Fame as a manager, not as a player, and it's because he's won 3 Stanley Cups and he's been around a long time and had a lot of success. I believe without reservation that his intentions and his actions were 100% deliberate on a few fronts. I do think that it was greasing the skids, so to speak, for the fact that there is going to be a deal in all likelihood at some point here. And it might not be one that the public looks at and says, that's a win, kind of similar to what the perception is of Colorado, in that trade that they made. Second, I think his choice of vehicle was fascinating, given that he did not go to one of the usual suspects, so to speak. He didn't go to Ian McIntyre. He didn't go to Ben Kuzma. He didn't go to Patrick Johnson. He chose to go to a long-standing, highly respected member of the media, and Gary Mason, who is affiliated with, and you'll appreciate this, Matt, one of the most highly regarded publications in North America. I believe that. And
now it is. Before, not so much. It employed all sorts of ne'er-do-wells.
What we always we've always said about Jim is he's been in markets, but he's kind of been a national figure. He's always understood that, and he's a Toronto guy too, as well. So I would not be surprised if he and his family were globe readers at one point. Go ahead, Laurence.
Isn't everybody?
But
I
don't work there anymore, Gilman. All right,
Well, you took offense when I made the comment that there were 2 newspapers.
Oh, that's right.
That's
right.
I know that it's a touchy subject with you. Anyway, getting back to the point at hand, I think it was deliberate going to a national publication and someone who's not in that locker room every day or following the team around. And I think it, was calculated, and I think it was highly impactful, actually. I also believe that it was a deliberate attempt to call out these players and make the statement that whatever is going on here, the onus is on you. It's not on your teammates. It's not on the coaches. It's not on management. It's not on ownership. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the fallout is. I will be fascinated to see the next interviews that are conducted with both JT Miller and Elias Pettersson to see what they have to say about this.
So there is a theory out there, and would like to know your take on this, that this was the last-ditch effort to almost shame the players into figuring this out. Because ultimately, Gary did well to put out an addendum on social media later to say, just to be clear, there was a scenario that he did carve out, Jim Rutherford, where nobody was traded because they started to play better. Ran out of space in the piece, but he wanted to make the record clear there that he did carve out the slim possibility for that as well. Do you think that was part of his calculation that you talked about, or do you think it is all prepping for a trade?
No, I agree with you, Blake. I think that part of this was putting the onus on the players for sure, and letting them answer for whatever problems that are being, dealt with by the coaching staff, by management, by the organization. And I think it's a test to see what their mettle is. I mean, I think Jim Rutherford probably had multiple objectives and intentions when he conducted this interview. So it'll be interesting to see what the fallout is for sure. And the interesting thing is he did it after the team won back-to-back games for the first time in over a month. They played a pretty good game, pretty good road game in St. Louis. And then to come back with this, it was like, wow, I was surprised. It was really good theater.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. If you're sitting in another GM's chair, somebody who has had discussions on either JT Miller or Elias Pettersson, and you read that from Rutherford, do you get do you get a jolt of urgency shot through you? Like, oh man, Jimmy real mad. Maybe I've got to improve my offer right now because it sounds like he's fixing to do something quick.
Or does he look more desperate?
I don't. Again, they were talking about a very, very, very veteran general manager who, doesn't rattle easily. I think one of the perhaps unintended consequences, and maybe not an unintended consequence, is that I guarantee you Jim Rutherford's phone rang off the hook yesterday from the other general managers, if for no other reason than to ask him, like, what's the deal here? Like, what is really going on? And what are you looking to do if they didn't already know? But I don't think it changes. Listen, these guys are all shrewd. We've talked about this before. They know what fair market value is for this player. You just saw a player move, a marquee player move. Now, granted, this player is going to be an unrestricted free agent in Rantanen, and you're talking about JT Miller, who's on an 8-year, significant contract. That's different, but you can see what the framing of the market value is for a top 6 player or a top 2, center iceman.
Are you surprised?
Whether it's him or whether it's Elias Pettersson?
It's clear the offers are not great for either of these players. Better probably for Pettersson, but most certainly for Pettersson. But I don't think that the Canucks have been blown away by anything they have seen. Otherwise, I think they probably would have pulled the trigger on one of those deals. Are you surprised that the value? And we all know the pressures on them. They've had down years. They've got long contracts, expensive ones. But I'm still mildly surprised that the offers have diminished to the point where they're not interested at all right now.
Well, you don't know that, Blake. I've heard that at the end of the day, it was the Rangers that killed the deal for Miller. I have heard that, the Canucks were framing a deal with Carolina for Pettersson, and we're pretty far down the road, and Carolina pivoted and went to Colorado, and that's how that deal fell apart. That doesn't mean, if either of those instances are true, and I don't know that they are, but if they are, that doesn't mean that hasn't been interest in either player for deals that would have benefited the Canucks team. You just don't know. But it's certainly, if there was ever any doubt, and I don't think there was ever any doubt that the Canucks are open for business, I'm pretty sure that interview and that article, sealed it.
The report was Hedel a first and prospect Adam Sikora for Miller. Don't know whether there's any protections on that first round pick. I don't know how much you know of Adam Sikora, but something like that. Does that make sense to you on Miller, Laurence? Is that something that you would consider?
I think it's Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a ballpark. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha.
You guys, I think it was Blake last week when we talked, put forth a deal of, potential deal with Carolina for Chatfield, and I can't remember who the other player was. And I said at the time,
Was it Netchess? Yeah.
Well, Netchess, Drury, a second and a fourth for Patterson. Is that in the ballpark?
Yeah, could be. Like, I mean, I wouldn't say no. Let's put it that way. Again, it's easy to speculate on these things, and I know this from my own experience. If you're not on the phone, if you're not the one that's actually on the phone talking to your counterparts, whether it's other general managers, and sometimes deals get framed by assistant general managers, you have no idea. Like, it's rank speculation, really.
Yeah, sure.
We are talking about valuable players who are, number one and number two center icemen. Every team are looking. 99% of the teams in the NHL are looking for those commodities.
Right. So one of the scenarios that Rutherford laid out with Mason is that we may have to make a move here where we don't get back a number one center iceman or even a number two center iceman, and we may have to get some pieces and then go out and try and find that replacement number one or number two centerman. How difficult is that to do?
It's on the more difficult side of the ledger. Let's put it that way. When I saw those comments, it made me think that they're prepping the market for something that, so that it's not a complete storm when they make a deal that brings back, IFCOM, as we call it, or futures, or, young players. But make no mistake, it is not easy to acquire a number one or number two center iceman, and it takes a savvy general manager, which Jim Rutherford clearly is, as the president of hockey operations. And I'm not, discounting Patrick Alvin in this discussion either. But it's a tall order if you're going to be cobbling together, first round picks and draft picks and prospects to try and get yourself a number one or two center iceman that's going to help the hockey team today.
Yeah, and he even talked about other positions, and that had us wondering a little bit about if you moved one of these center icemen for a frontline defenseman, and then basically said, man, with Hughes, Hronek, this frontline defenseman, and Thatcher Demko and or Kevin Lankinen going forward, maybe that's a better fit for Rick Tocchet hockey. I mean, Blake will hate it. It'll be a lot of 2-1 games. But, does that make sense to you at all?
Well, it makes
Laurence?
I have always ascribed to the theory that if you're trading center icemen, you're trading them for defensemen, or other center icemen or defensemen. You don't typically trade centers for wingers. You tend to lose those kind of deals. And I have consistently stated on this podcast with you guys that I believe their defense is definitely in need of an upgrade in the top four, or better yet, top two pairing. And to receive back that piece in a deal for either one of these players, and I'm only speaking of one component of the deal.
Right.
That makes some sense for sure.
So given what we know now, this interview's happened. There's even more uncertainty perhaps cast into the room. How do you suspect they will respond? First of all, do you think Rutherford would go down and follow up that interview with a chat in the room or a chat with those two guys? And then secondly, just what does that room do with all of this information and another sort of bomb drop, if you will? Although, speaking of which, I've heard from a source that one player in the room has already said this room needs to get nuked. I mean, what do you think they do with all of this swirling around them?
Well, I bet you the first thing that happened was Jim Rutherford got phone calls from the agents representing the two players to ask him to clarify his situation, or the situation for his client, if it needed to be done. I don't think that. Listen, I know how I would handle it, or
Okay.
the regimes that I would have. I believe in dialogue, open dialogue, all the time. Things get resolved with communication. They do not get resolved by silence or ignoring the problem. I would think that there would be, discussion that would occur both, with the players individually at this point, I believe, and with the coach. And, it may very well have been, that a meeting occurred with each player, with Jim Rutherford, Patrick Alvin, and Rick Tocchet, just to discuss the situation and, move forward. But I don't think that, lots of times nothing is the best thing to do. I'm not certain that that's the right path in this instance.
Yeah. Can they win games immediately in the wake of this, do you think? Like 2 in a row?
Yeah.
No, I don't mean the rest of the season, Matt. I mean immediately here. Like, is there a chance that they need to lick their wounds here for a couple of games?
Yeah, I think what could happen is both guys get pissed off.
There you go.
And they're embarrassed. And, they want to, shove it up, somebody's, backside.
Right.
Really. And that could very easily be the case. And who knows? This could be something that galvanizes the group and brings focus to the players. Who knows? I mean, it's going to be fascinating theater, as I said, to see it play out. But I don't see any reason why this can't be something that the group harnesses and brings them together.
Could have been one of Jim's motivations for this, right? See if we can get a final spark out of them here. Great stuff, Laurence. Very insightful as always. We appreciate the time, good sir, and we'll catch up next week.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.